Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, here to break down the GPP game scores. First look with Adam Rauch for week 15. Before doing that, want you guys to know that this podcast is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. They've got a huge playoff best ball tournament going right now. We have rankings for that by Justin Herzig up on Established Run. So check that out. If you're interested in playing, use promo code ETR over at Underdog Fantasy for an initial deposit match bonus up to $100. Adam, let's take a look at the GPP game scores. Before we actually dive into this week, we'll recap last week, which, didn't project well as a game stacking slate, but we did get the Lawrence Ingram stacks hit in a pretty big way with the Derrick Henry bring back in that Jacksonville, Tennessee game. Henry almost had a huge game. Evan Ingram, he's been the GPP winner 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks ago, it was as a leverage piece in that Detroit Jacksonville game. And this week it was just absolutely nobody played him, and he goes for 40 at like 1%.
It was a crazy game for Evan Ingram. I think he had 11 catches, and Levitan and Silva talked about this on the weekly recap show. But Ingram's always had a defined role in Jacksonville. He's had targets. I mean, there have been games where he's taken dips, but he's had games where he's had 5 to 7 targets consistently. And Trevor Lawrence has really elevated his play, and he just makes his weapons a lot better. And that really came to fruition last week. I mean, they played a horrible pass defense in Tennessee, and everything just kind of went the way of Lawrence and Ingram. And even some lineups had Derrick Henry built within those stacks. And even though Henry was pretty heavily owned, especially in the slant, he did get you enough to make those stacks work.
Yeah, and I'm always okay kind of playing the correlated chalk pieces if it works out. And running back was spread enough that 25 to 30% Henry wasn't like, absolutely killing me. There are a lot of guys sort of in that 20% bucket last week. I was like, the ceiling's fine on these guys, and they're spread out enough because they're taking from one another that individually I didn't think any of them was too bad. The Lions-Viking game was near the top of our game scores, and it was kind of crazy how chalky this was, and that the game hit with the Amon-Ra St. Brown chalk failing in a really big way, which I was off this game because of ownership, despite it rating well in the game scores. On one of my 3 teams, I did a mini correlation with Amon-Ra chalk and Dalvin Cook because I was like, the game rates so well, I want like access to it on one of my teams. But that obviously flopped in a huge way as Dalvin and Amon-Ra were 2 of the worst plays in that game. Jefferson got steamed even higher than kind of what we thought, and he had a big game. But the Goff stacks really, hit. Basically, if you did a Goff stack without Amon-Ra, you were there. Reynolds finds the end zone. The big thing was Goff, Jefferson, Chark. 3.5% of top 1% lineups in the slant had that combination.
Yeah, this game really got steamed up. The top 8 values in this game, all of them eclipsed 13% ownership. And I think Chark came in. Chark was on the lower end of, Cousins came in at 12, but like everyone came in at 10 or above, or 10 or above. But yeah, I mean, we still had some good outcomes here. Justin Jefferson obviously popped off enough to make that 23% ownership in the slant worth it. Goff got there, obviously. Cousins even did well, though he just wasn't as good of a value as Goff was. Then you had the big game from Chark. Amon-Ra came in at 42%. Yeah, I mean, we knew he was going to get steamed. I didn't think he would get quite that high. That correlation there that we talked about, Goff, Jefferson, Chark, came in. You were talking about the top 1% of lineups in the slant, which is what I compare when I do these recap threads that you can find on my Twitter handle. All of the ownerships that I pull are from the slant, so that's what I'm comparing it against. Goff, Jefferson, and Chark were in 3.5% of the top 1% lineup. So if that confuses you at all, top 1% lineups in the slant is roughly the top 260 lineups in the tournament. So while those correlations were in 3.5% of those lineups, they were kind of on like the lower end. So you weren't shipping anything, but you were probably cashing out if you had those 3 plays.
It's it's kind of interesting to see what it is in They were a popular combo, I guess, is what I would say in general. Because Chark got steamed to a point where I didn't think he was a good play, and then we get into the conversation of like, is a guy who's like a little bit steamed, but he's leveraged off a teammate an okay play. Like I think Goff, Chark, Amon-Ra was probably bad with them getting, it's kind of one or the other. They were overowned. They were definitely overowned collectively. And one guy that you could get a third the ownership of Amon-Ra was Jamar Chase, and Bengals Brown stuff was, I think you put in our show notes that you were on that. That was the game.
Yeah.
My main team was a Burrow Mixon Chase team. I thought there was enough upside for the running back to get there with that. I didn't bring it back with DPJ. I kind of wish I did. But the Njoku play hit a bit at tight end. I was a little worried about Njoku first game back, but that was a fine bring back. But there were two bring back options that were viable. But Burrow ended up really killing you when Goff was the chalk quarterback and outscored him by like 12 or so.
Yeah, I was really on this game, and it wasn't very fun to get the update about 5 minutes into the slate that both T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd were both out. That really put a dagger in me as far as stacking this game. And yeah, I think another regret of mine that you just kind of touched on was not playing a lot of DPJ. We had consecutive weeks where DPJ was a really good value and was going to be chalk, and he played really well. We had an opportunity here. I think he was 4,900 on DraftKings last week, where he wasn't as great of a value, but he wasn't going to be as owned. And he just has such a defined role in Cleveland's offense. And we just had it upsets me because there was so much opportunity for this game to really get there. And even then, Burrow, Chase, and Njoku stacks were in a little less than 2% of the top 1% lineups in the slate. So, but again, that's towards the bottom end of that list. That's towards you weren't winning anything with that, because we talked about how Goff got there over Burrow at at way less price. So, but I tend to look for games like that, especially as we get closer to lock, where you're just finding these pockets of ownership that you can take advantage of. And I really thought Higgins and Boyd were going to be good plays. It's just we got a bad run out, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Let's take a look at this week's stuff. Before we look at the specific game scores, I do kind of like to look at quarterback to start, just because I think quarterback impacts how I'm thinking about stacks a lot lately. And honestly, for me, I feel like one of the good things with the DK pricing is that the field's pretty wide open. I think especially on this slate, we have the high ceiling quarterbacks with Hurts, Mahomes. You can throw Herbert, Fields, Burrow in there as like kind of a second tier, but they're not so far ahead that you can't play the value guys. And there's only so many of them. So it's not like one of those slates where you need like 5 super high end quarterbacks to fail. And the pricing being tougher with, expensive wide receivers have been probably the highest leverage point all year in GPPs, right? Like those are the guys that seem to be moving the needle the most as far as to whether or not you're winning a GPP. And sometimes they're hard to play with the expensive quarterbacks. So you can hit like a cheaper quarterback stack, maybe sacrifice a little bit of ceiling on the quarterback side of things. Definitely sacrifice raw value ceiling, but you get more shots at getting that right expensive wide receiver. So it's pretty open to us, Adam. The game totals aren't great. You can see there is no total hitting 50 this week, but there's still like a decent amount of value spread out among these games, which makes it a little bit more interesting and more dynamic than one might think just spotting the game totals.
Yeah, you can take a look at the table right now. This is obviously going to change. The Raiders and Patriots have the highest game score right now on both sides. I think that probably will change. There's just a lot of value in that game. But it kind of goes back to your point you made earlier. This is another solid week to spend up at quarterback, but I think there's still a lot of opportunities to play value guys. We'll go through some of those spots. But go ahead.
I just did want to note on the Patriots thing. We're projecting Ramondre and Damien Harris out, which if that happens, basically what you're seeing with the game scores is we have really good values, but not high ownership because the rest of them we're assuming things different than the market. So either we're going to lose the value or we're going to get a ton more ownership.
Right.
And that score is going to drop, which was the hard part looking
Yeah.
at these on Thursday. But that's the case not only with the running backs at Harris and Strong, but you'll see that a little bit wide receiver as well with Aguilar and Thornton based on Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker statuses.
Yeah. But I don't know. Which game do you want to talk about first? Because I think even though we have a lot of low totals, last week we thought it was a really gross slate. This week we kind of have some more balanced out totals, a lot of like 47 and a half, 48s, 49. So I still think there's a lot of interesting spots here. So which one do you want to tackle first?
I guess KC Houston is interesting to me where I want to see if people are afraid to stack Houston, or I'm sorry, afraid to stack KC. Obviously, they're afraid to stack Houston as they should be.
Yeah.
Like, are they afraid to stack KC because of game script concerns? And we've seen situations before where the pass rate over expectation is so good for KC, the efficiency is so good that I think KC stuff can get there if it's pushed even a little bit. And so that's really interesting to me. The Houston side, I feel like we've used this game as a comparison like more often than we should, but there was a game a couple years ago when KC played the Jets and we had like double cheap Jets bring backs because all the wide receivers were out. It was like Berrios and Denzel Mims, and they let you stack Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, and then they gave you some value. And it really worked out pretty well. And I could see something similar this week where you've got 3 cheap Houston wide receivers if Nico and Brandon Cooks are both out again that you can look to in Chris Moore, Philip Dorsett, and Amari Rodgers. I like Dorsett quite a bit as the kind of flop lag play, Moore hit in a huge way. I do think we made a mistake in our projections last week, not projecting the target share gap being wider between those two, just because Moore is more of a slot guy, definitely more solidified for targets. But now that he's $1,000 more expensive than Dorsett and heavily owned, like pretty easy to go Dorsett here. You can also like Jordan Akins, if you just want to correlate like cheap tight end is almost pure punt. You can play the Rex Burkhead or Dare if you want to take a chance on like Burkhead can catch passes if he's playing a lot from behind. The concern there is just the playing time. But my point is there's routes to playing like 2 Houston bringbacks in this game and playing the game to shoot out a little bit and just hope Houston has some offensive success at home.
Yeah, this is really interesting because there's a lot of factors on the Houston side of things that I think will affect how you play the Kansas City side. First off, the status of Nico Collins and Cooks is going to be important. Both missed last week, but Brandon Cooks returned to practice today. I don't know if that means he's fully healthy or if he's even fully interested in playing for this team, to be quite honest with you.
Yep.
But he did return, so keep an eye on that. Collins, I haven't heard anything on, but he has been a target vacuum when Cooks has been out and when Collins has been the primary receiver. Second thing is Dameon Pierce is likely out this week. And in the games where Dameon has been limited this year or hasn't been on the field, I'm talking going back to like the very beginning of the year when they weren't playing him, the running game was broken. And so much of the Texans' offensive success plays off of Dameon Pierce's ability in the running game. If he's out, it kind of concerns me to play any Texans guys, even if they go into a more pass-heavy script. The third thing that's interesting is last week against the Cowboys, they went into a dual quarterback system with Driscoll and Davis Mills basically splitting snaps. So you're kind of also taking into consideration, okay, we know when Davis Mills plays, who does he target? Who does he like to go to? He kind of likes to go more the route of Chris Moore if he's playing. He loves throwing to Nico. Driscoll, if he's in there, we don't have as much of a sample on Driscoll. Plus, he runs the ball.
Yeah.
So those are all things to keep in mind on the Houston side of things. But yeah, I mean, even if Cooks and Collins play, you're getting some affordable bringbacks on that side, and it will allow you to easily play Mahomes and Kelsey. Or even if you want to, dip into the Kansas City secondary receivers with Juju, or if you want to play McKinnon again. I think there's a lot of different routes to go there.
Yeah. I'm definitely interested in it. I do want to see how many people right now we're assuming that people are picking up on the game total and whatnot and playing Mahomes, Kelsey at a high clip. And if that's the case, then I'm a little bit more interested in doing maybe more of the fade game and playing Isaiah Pacheco. But yeah, that game definitely intrigues me in terms of how it's set up and how the field might interpret things. We get a bunch of games late aside from that game that, look interesting for a variety of reasons. Not so much Cardinals Broncos because quarterback issues with Russ possibly being out and Kyler definitely being out. The total there is mega, mega low. Right now it's 37, like one of the lowest totals we've seen all season. But you get the Patriots Raiders game, which we touched on a little bit already. Titans Chargers, Bengals Bucks. Those are all interesting. This Bengals Bucks game features, some of the higher rated teams in pass rate over expectation. This is over the last 5 weeks, so 4 to 5 games per team. And the Bengals, we've seen them, they're near tops in pass rate over expectation. Recently, the Bucks have scaled back a little bit, but their overall pass rate's still high, even though their pass rate over expectations dropped some. Just one, they just haven't been that good, which has forced them to throw a lot. You do get this weird offense too with Brady right now, where he's not efficient downfield. So you just have to have more short throws, which, is good for Godwin and good for the volume being there, even if not the efficiency. But having two PROE teams meet each other, I'm intrigued in that game.
Yeah, I'm intrigued too, especially because I don't really think we're going to have, if you're going to correlate and stack this game, you're not going to have to worry about ownership on any Tampa plays, in my opinion. Godwin may get above 10%. Right now, we haven't projected just under. I highly doubt he's going to get very steamed up at his price.
Yeah.
And like you said, his role right now is perfect for the Tampa offense and what Brady is able to do and what he's been good at over the last few weeks. Of course, we would like to see Mike Evans get more involved. Evans had a touchdown last week, called back on a holding penalty. Brady targeted him on a 4th down, red zone played in the end zone that Brady just left short. They are at home in this game. The total is low, so I think people will be off of it. But like you said, look, we're looking for stacks with ceiling and with high pass rates over expectation. Both of those teams meet that criteria, and you're never going to have to worry about the Bengals on the other side. Jamar Chase has the highest ceiling projection of any wide receiver on the slate as of today. And no matter, even if he gets up there in ownership, right now we have him a hair under 15%. He's just such a good play, and it's just so hard not to click him when he has a ceiling like that.
Yeah, if you're an absolute sicko, you could play in large field tournaments T. Higgins if he goes. But second time this season, last week we saw T. Higgins kind of be injured during the week. Seems like he's totally fine, and then they just don't play him. So he's limited again this week, which is a bit scary. I know for season long stuff, I'm not sure what to do with him. But
sorry to cut you off. One quick note on the Tampa side again. I did kind of dig into the injury reports for this game a little bit, and it seems like since his defense is pretty banged up, Trey Hendrickson is likely not going to play, and they have some injuries in their secondary. So if there's going to be a week where Tampa may be able to get back on track, this might be it.
Yeah, and you hit the ownerships are going to stay low. Evans has a bad value projection, but he always has, a pretty wide range of outcomes. He's been on the Leone model for a couple of weeks now. He's run really bad on touchdowns this year, and on deep play, he dropped a 70-yard touchdown early in the year. He had a long one called back via holding last week. And you can see, we have both running backs projected for around 12 points. And it's if you kind of get the one that if you guess correctly here and you run pure in terms of touchdowns or one playing more than the other, there's definitely upside at almost no ownership. So I'm pretty intrigued in that game. One of the other games late that I guess we should talk a little bit more about Las Vegas, New England. We kind of hit on the New England side, which is there just might be a ton of value here for team for playing against Las Vegas, where they should be able to have offensive success and a lot of guys out, there's a lot of value. And we kind of have to see where the dust is going to settle in terms of ownership and injuries and stuff. The Vegas side is a situation where you've got two really high ceiling players in Jacobs and Devontae Adams, because the way this offense works, it's just so concentrated on those two guys. But you also get like a touch of value on Hollins and Moreau cheap. So there's just a lot that you can go here. And the game scores sometimes maybe overrates deep teams. I know it's kind of because we use the top 8 players. So it's like, it's hard to tell because sometimes you get a really good stack that's just like 3 specific guys and it's not going to rate well in game scores if the other guys stink. This is sort of the opposite of that, where it's like, I don't know how much I like these plays, but they're helping the game score because the 6th, 7th, 8th plays in this game are better than the 6th, 7th, 8th plays in a lot of other games.
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right on that. That's why I really like diving into the projections on Sunday morning when I'm building and looking at the full scope of the game as opposed to just looking at the number that's produced on the table. I think it's always worth looking at the actual projections, seeing why the scores are the way that they are, and you can kind of pick out pockets and correlations within those lists. And you can say, okay, well, yeah, I can see that the 6, 7, 8 options on the Raiders are much better than the 6, 7, 8 options on another game, but maybe the 1, 2, 3 options on that other game have way better ceiling, and I may want to look at that more. So yeah, totally with you there. Another thing I'll say about the Raiders is just kind of what I said about Jamar Chase. You said at the top that expensive wide receivers have been the biggest leverage point this year in DFS. Well, Davante Adams certainly falls into that category, and he's expensive. He's at $9K, but him and Chase they are completely separated on ceiling projection compared to any other receivers on the slate. So you're getting some good value with New England. Not saying that you need to absolutely hammer the New England side because that's obviously going to even out over the course of the week, but pretty hard to ignore the ceiling on Adams and even Jacob at that ownership. I mean, he's always a great play.
Yeah. Titans Chargers game. Levitan tweeted out earlier today, and kind of another thing looking at our pass rate over expectation stuff, but Chargers PROE, they were always like slightly positive under Staley, but they've been a lot higher the last 5 weeks. And when you combine that with how up-tempo they are, it's a lot of pass plays. So Tennessee, of course, not going to have a high PROE. Where they were over the last 5 weeks, they're actually like a little bit closer to neutral than they've been, which is a surprise. Looks like Treylon Burks is going to be out again. I know last week I played Austin Hooper as leverage over Okonkwo, and that was a disaster. But they project similarly again this week, so you can get some leverage with Hooper over Okonkwo. You also get, big dog is always nice in a game stack because you get the big run, and it really just changes the game and then lets you play the Chargers side. But there's really cheap pass catchers if you don't want to do the Henry route. There's also the Chargers side gets a little muddled, Adam, with Big Mike and Keenan back. But the guy I kind of initially like this week is Big Mike Williams. Tennessee's been a bit of a pass funnel too. We know the ceiling's really big there. That's the one I'm most interested in if I was stacking Herbert.
Yeah, Herbert himself has got a really nice setup this week. He's got the 3rd highest ceiling projection of any quarterback. At least that's when I was looking at this earlier this afternoon. I mean, he's in a really nice spot. We just talked about at the beginning of this episode what Trevor Lawrence was able to do against this Tennessee defense. And now you're plugging in Justin Herbert and the extremely pass-heavy Chargers against this defense. It just seems like an amazing spot for the wide receivers for the Chargers. So at our current ownership projections, Mike Williams seems like the play to make. I mean, his ceiling projection is not much lower than Keenan Allen's, and he's coming in way less ownership. So I love that there. Interesting thing about this game is we've got 2 expensive running backs who fit well in game stacks historically. But if you're going to play Herbert and one of those running backs and a Chargers pass catcher, you're kind of in a spot where you're not left with a ton of salary. So how would you handle that for anyone doing builds with this game stack about playing the running backs?
The salary is definitely the most difficult part about this. I think what you could do if you want to play Tennessee to throw, you can double up their cheap pass catchers. Like technically Hooper and Okonkwo both got there, right? Like for sub 3K last week, you were pretty stoked to get, they're a little bit more expensive combined this week, but you were pretty stoked to get, almost 30 DraftKings points between the two of them. And then Robert Woods is such dust, but like absolutely no one's going to play him. That I'm somewhat intrigued by that.
And I think the hard part, even Nick Westbrook-Akine he had a pretty big spike week a few weeks ago that was super random, but he's got a role there at least.
Yeah, I want to look into Akine versus Woods a little bit closer heading into the weekend. The tough part for me is like I really just don't know how to answer it on the Chargers side, where it's a type of game that on the outset you would think if you're stacking it, you want to stack it heavily. But then when I look at how to actually play it, I'm having a hard time building a Herbert double that's like not overly expensive. Like I think Gerald Everett's overpriced at tight end. And then I don't really want to play Keenan and Big Mike together, but if you play Eckler with one of those guys, it's a ton of salary. So that's where it gets really tricky for me. And I wonder if you could skinny Herbert, even though it doesn't seem like it makes sense, and just hope that you pick the right pass catcher. That's one thing I'm considering doing. If not, I might suck it up and just play Eckler, Mike, Herbert, and a cheap Titans pass catcher. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would probably lean that way too. Are we out on Josh Palmer as a stack option here? I mean, his value score is really low, but I mean, he's had a role there. I mean, even with Mike coming back, I don't know what you think about that. That seems like a thin play to me, but maybe if you correlate it, there's some room there because that'll save you some salary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tougher spot than it kind of seems on the outset. But that New England thing is going to be key too, though, Adam. Like not only in terms of the New England Las Vegas game stack, but it could let you do a lot of things. Like we might have a week where we can play the stack that feels expensive because it's been tough to find value this year. We've got the cheap Houston Texans guys. We may have multiple cheap Patriots guys. It may actually end up working out where you can fill in kind of a game onslaught around that.
That's a good point.
The Philly-Chicago game is second in our game score, is also the second highest game total of the slate. We've got two really high ceiling quarterbacks in this one between Fields and Hurts. Hurts has our highest ceiling projection this week, even higher than Mahomes, even though he has a lower base projection. Fields with our fourth highest ceiling projection. You can see him base projection. He's like below Burrow. He's over 2 points below Herbert. And then he starts to get really close to Herbert and is right in line with Burrow when we look at ceiling. And that's potentially even shorting his ceiling just because his rushing upside's just been so outrageous and such an outlier that it's hard to fully quantify that.
Yeah, his ceiling projection is separated by a full 2 points in terms of quarterback on DraftKings. So the only problem, or not the problem, but the only bummer is the pricing on that Eagles stack did not get any better compared to last week. Hurts and Devontae are $100 more expensive on DraftKings this week, and AJ Brown's still $8K. So, but I think I love playing Eagles stacks. So we've talked about this all year. This team comes in so expensive, but oftentimes so low owned with such a good ceiling. It's just you have to have the weeks where even if you get those ceiling outcomes from the Eagles, you hope that it works out in the end and that no value plays below them just absolutely pop off. I think we had like that AJ Brown week a few weeks ago where he just absolutely went ballistic, and it didn't end up mattering at all. So so you're hoping you don't get that, but I don't know. I like this game a lot too. What do you think of stacking the Eagles with a Cole Kmet bring back? But that seemed a little interesting to me, but wanted your take on it.
That's what's tough about this game is I feel like I almost don't even want to bear unless I'm playing the field side of it.
Yeah.
Komet, we do have rating pretty well, and it always makes sense to just correlate the tight end. So I think that's fine. Komet actually projects a little bit better than I expected at 4K. He's just someone in my head where I'm like 4K for Cole Komet. Like, give me the 3K tight ends. But in terms of pure correlation, that's fine. Claypool still hasn't seen the role that we expected. I do think like Montgomery is possibly in play. He did miss practice with an illness. One thing I wanted to know on the Eagles side of things, I'm trying to see when. So since Goddard went down, we had one spike week in snaps for Quez Watkins, but we've had 3 straight games of like really strong target shares for him. The snaps in 3 of the 4 games are like 50%, which is what he's done all season. One of them he jumped to 80%, but the targets per route run have increased for him. And that's someone I know like Dink and CSU Rams like a lot that first week. I'm definitely more into him this week as we feel a little bit more confident about the volume. And it seems like a good time to make that bet if you're going to stack this game.
Yeah, and we should note in that same breath that Dallas Goedert did return to practice this week. He's been brought off IR. Seems like he's going to play. Don't know how much of a role he'll have, but he will be out there. So
yeah, they have a 21-day window, so sometimes it's hard to tell if those guys are going to play or not. But that would kill the Quez play. I would not want to play Quez personally if Goddard's active.
Yeah, just worth keeping an eye on for that.
Absolutely. Okay, the last like major game we. All right, sorry about that. I just my internet kicked me off here for a second. Let me see if Adam's gone. All right, here we got Adam.
I got kicked out there for a second. That was my bad.
I got kicked out too. I don't know what happened, but we're still recording, so that's good.
All right, we're still good.
I can chop it up too. What?
So you were saying there was one more big game we were going to talk about, and then I got kicked out.
Yeah. One more big game that we kind of had outlined, this Dallas at Jacksonville game. And, we saw the Jacksonville stacks get there last week. We've seen Trevor Lawrence on a pretty good run here. Obviously, the Dallas defense has been really good overall, despite, having some trouble with the Jeff Driscoll Davis Mills combination last week. Initial thoughts on the Dallas Jacksonville game that has the 3rd highest total on the slate. Obviously, a lot of that on the Dallas side of things.
It's not rating well on the game scores, and I think that's primarily because we have a lot of ownership on it right now, especially on DraftKings, and there's just not a whole lot of elite ceiling options. Like the ceiling that we're looking at right now is pretty flat. You're not seeing any guys that really stick out. But yeah, you can see like Etienne's getting up there around 18%, Kirk's getting up there around 20%, CD on the other side, and Schultz on the other side. So this game actually scores better on FanDuel as it stands today. Of course, we always love a pace-up game, and Pat Thorman wrote this up as a pace-up game. So yeah, I kind of want to keep an eye. If you're playing FanDuel, I would look at this game. Target this game a little bit more heavily, and compared to if you're playing DraftKings. It's kind of hard to say that after the week Lawrence had last week, but this is obviously a much different setup. They're up against the Dallas defense this week, even though they're at home. Dallas is certainly a much different opponent than Tennessee, so I'm not as excited to play it. But hey, there's a lot of different ways you could go on the Jacksonville side. I would just be mindful of ownership there.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you can see in the pace up stuff for Thorman, one of the other games was Detroit at the Jets. We'll kind of see. It might be some bad East Coast weather that has me, looking at some spots where the weather's a bit nicer or games are inside on the slate a bit more. I guess, yeah, we get KC Houston inside. We get, Dallas at Jacksonville, warmer weather. So that's something I'll be looking at as we break things down into the weekend. I guess final thoughts here, Adam. Any dirt plants, or I guess you could just do a regular flag plant if you don't want a dirt planet.
Oh no, I love dirt plants. I love dirt plants. I actually had kind of a hard time coming up with one this week, but
Yeah.
There was one guy I thought of and kind of looked into it, and then I saw that he was on your Buy Leone model, which validated me.
I think I know who it might be.
I'm going to go with Mike Evans this week.
Yeah.
And like you said, I mean, he's just had really, really bad touchdown luck this year. I kind of talked about it earlier when we were talking about this game. They're going to be at home. These teams historically really like to throw. Since his defense is pretty banged up, people, I feel like, and if you're going to want to play an attractive Bucs receiver, you're going to play Godwin. So that leaves Evans as kind of like the gross play. So I'm going to go Mike Evans as my dirt plant.
Okay. I like that. I'm going to go, man, this feels real gross, but I think I'm going to go Robert Woods in the Tennessee Chargers game.
He was on my short list too. I'm not going to lie. So I'm down with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to thread that needle where it's gross enough to be a dirt plant, but we have some semblance of hope. It seems hard to believe, but he does have a 20% target share on this season. He hasn't had a target share less than 17.6% the last 5 weeks. Traylon Burks looks like he's probably going to miss again, and they're underdogs in this game and going to have to throw. So I think it's a pretty good spot for Bob Woods. Not the type of play I would play into ownership, but I think it's highly unlikely he gets steamed, and it definitely makes it a little bit easier to play the expensive side of the Chargers things, and also will be, hopefully leverage off of like a guy like Aguilar, who's going to get steamed quite a bit for New England if Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker miss.
I mean, if you're going to plant something in the dirt, it's got to be Bobby Trees, right?
Oh, look at that. All right. You're going to take Dink's job. Dink better be careful here, with the puns.
I got the horticultural references.
All right, Adam, thanks so much as always for joining me. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Remember, catch me on Establish the Millie with Dink on Saturday morning, breaking down all the GPP action a little bit more in depth and with our updated fantasy point ownership projections. And you'll have Adam's game scores right up tomorrow, Friday night. And again, that will be after we do a real fresh round of ownership updates and whatnot after the injury reports on Friday. All right, that'll do it for us. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.